You were in Zimbabwe for the elections themselves, for the days after the elections and the release of the results. What was your assessment of the elections and what followed?
I actually saw that the voting period was very peaceful. Mm-hmm. And if you were to look at elections since 2000, this would be one of the most peaceful election, and you would obviously say that. There were suggestions that there was subtle violence, particularly in rural areas. And this is a historical part of Zimbabwean politics, going back to the liberation struggle, where ZANU-PF has always used certain means that visitors would not see or understand as violence. And I'm not sure that any election in the short term to the medium term in the Zimbabwean context could change from that so easily or in such a very quick way. I was shocked by the violence that then happened on the 1st to the 2nd, which resulted in, I think, 6 people being killed, and some reports say 10. And a lot of people were injured. I thought that it was from the impact of rubber bullets which were fired by the military. But unfortunately, the military also fired live bullets. And this was extremely tragic. It reminded me of the 2008 election, where violence, extensive violence, spiked from an election dispute, just like the one that is currently playing out. Thank God, I think we are probably beyond the physical violence, and perhaps the leadership in Zimbabwe can address this problem.
Now, the issue of the elections being free and fair, a number of analysts are saying there was no way the election was going to be free and fair. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission itself is beholden to ZANU-PF, no matter what it says on paper. And now that Nelson Chamisa is taking the poll results to court, others are saying even that is a worthless attempt because the courts themselves are beholden to the governing party. What's your take?
Yes, historically, it's exactly as these analysts have pointed out, that most, if not all, governing institutions in Zimbabwe are embedded into a system of ZANU-PF. So when Mugabe was removed from power, the system of rule remained intact. And the relationship between governing institutions is such that there is a mutation between what is purely partisan and political with what should be institutions of government. And what is disturbing about this relationship is that ZANU-PF has overall authority on all these institutions. So a system of democracy has developed where institutions of government are partisanly dominated and controlled. But that does not preclude the fact that the opposition and civil society should continuously test these institutions, because that's the only method you can improve the institutions on one end, and on the other end, you can hold them accountable. The law allows the MDC to go to court, and they have this option, and I think they have to exercise it. Otherwise, the only other institution would be, the only other alternative would be to embark on protest, which might end up with violence, which would be problematic. The other thing that we have to say is that this is not the first time that the MDC would have gone to court to challenge a presidential results. It has happened in 2003 and all the other elections. Unfortunately, specifically for the presidential results, the courts have not been able to declare a legal outcome. So we still have court cases that are pending in the courts of our presidential challenges, which were presented to the Zimbabwean legal system by the late Morgan Tsvangirai, the leader of the MDC. And until he passed on, there was no legal outcome. I would hope that, in fact, for me, the context of this election was not necessarily supposed to be an outcome which would be favorable to the MDC. I would have taken, if I was within the MDC think tank, I would have taken these elections as a context to test ZANU-PF's faith and to test their word, to test the institutions that emerged out of the constitution that was negotiated in 2008 to 2013, so that you can demonstrate to the world that the transition of 2008 to 2013, the gains, the democratic gains from that process are seriously there, and the new dispensation, as they call themselves, is determined to uphold and reinforce those democratic gains. So this would be an election to either expose ZANU-PF extreme rule, or to sort of set a context for consensus to say now we have legitimate institutions of democracy, and any elections would then be determined by that kind of thinking and determination.
All right, so now we're a few days away from Emmerson Mnangagwa, president-elect, being sworn in. Is he different to Robert Mugabe? Can this new dawn still happen in Zimbabwe, given that this is the man who was Robert Mugabe's right-hand man, served as his security officer during the worst times, the bloodiest times in Zimbabwe's history? But can young Zimbabweans, all Zimbabweans, have any faith at all in this new dawn?
You see, that's a very important question and a very interesting one, I think, to Zimbabweans and others who are watching Zimbabwe. Mnangagwa is known to be an enforcer in the previous regime. He has had his first opportunity after November to demonstrate goodwill, to demonstrate determination that he is willing to transform the Zimbabwean society. This is his second chance to do that. The first chance is not convincing at all. We'll see what comes out of the second chance when he formally takes power. But what is interesting is that his posture and demeanor, when you look at what he portrays or he sends out personally, it's interesting that he comes out as a very reasonable, calm, conciliatory, and so on. But the question is, does this not sort of hide the subtle, the hidden intentions? And this is a big question, because a lot of us would want to look at him on the basis of his sincerity, what the message that he sends across physically and by his own word. And I must say that the murder of protesters in the previous week does not augur well with the message that has been sent out. The second thing is, if you closely observe what is happening, you can see that there seems to be two sources of messages emerging out of Zimbabwe. There's one side which is very cohesive and forceful, and to an outsider would seem to be going for a very cohesive kind of approach to the current dispute over the elections. And there's the other side which seems to be very calm and measured in its response.
And both of these sides come from ZANU-PF.
And both of these sides are coming from ZANU-PF. So the question is it ZANU-PF acting in two different ways, but in a coordinated way, or is it ZANU-PF actually telling us that this institution is very divided, and Mnangagwa would be, at this present moment, struggling with managing the internal dissent or discohesion in his party, and the ideas which are coming from the party, where one side is advocating for a violent, cohesive approach, and the other is saying, we as Zimbabweans, we can still find peaceful ways to deal with the internal differences. And lastly, I would say that Mnangagwa is going to be inheriting a very divided Zimbabwe. As divided as Zimbabwe was during Mugabe's presidency. Divided socially, with probably the highest inequality in the world, where you have a small circle of political elites and maybe economic elites, with the whole concentration of the national economic cake, and the majority of the ordinary people very poor. It's a country that is ethnically divided between the Shona and the Ndebele, but also other ethnic groups that are not mentioned to exist in Zimbabwe, and their identity is seemingly denied. A country that is divided along political lines. It is a country that has no imagination of a narrative or a political myth that can unite them, because during Mugabe's reign, right, the sense of belonging was sort of built around the persona of this dictator. So Zimbabwe became Mugabe. In the case of Mnangagwa, he would need pure social scientists and political scientists who should sit down with him and say, we are moving from the First Republic into the Second Republic, and therefore this country needs a new inclusive myth to unite it, which will be the foundation of economic reasoning and other programs.